What's going on, everybody? Hope you're all having a happy holiday season so far. Today is December 22nd of 2022, and in today's edition of the Superstream number 44 as it is today, we'll be talking a lot about the NFL as the big countdown to Super Bowl 57 is well underway. So there's a lot to unpack. So much has happened over the past week. And again, this is going to be focusing on the NFL, not a whole lot of other news by the numbers stories for you in this stream. Now, to take us in to all of these NFL riddles, I do want to follow up on one of my more recent live streams titled Gematria is Fascinating. And in that video, I talk about a truck crash resulting in an oil spill that happened in Florida, and how it was connected to previous car crash synchronicities that I've had with Zachary K. Hubbard. Now, after I made this video, I realized I probably could have gotten my point across a little better, so I pinned this comment reminding people that, hey, this is not about making accusations or calling names. I strive to be a neutral observer of this world, and this video is about noting the remarkable syncs surrounding this whole discussion. Zach actually brought this video up a couple of days later and gave me a call during his live stream, and that conversation at the end of the video is linked below if you want to hear that. And, you know, I just want to be clear. I'm not calling Zach a snake oil salesman because the techniques he uses when decoding sports are absolutely relevant to the scripting of the games. And I know people love to shit on him when he gets something wrong, and maybe he's misled people about one or two of his picks in the past. I think there's evidence of that, but I have no doubt that, you know, if you follow the work, you can win. And I would give the same advice to anybody using numbers to pick sports as I would to anybody investing in the market. You know, as valuable as good advice is, also do your own homework. And I think there's other techniques as well. And we'll talk about some of those in this video as we go on. So this wasn't, you know, a bash on Zach or anything. I know a lot of people have opinions on him. That's fine. Again, I'm more about sharing Gematria, talking about this language, and, you know, just reviewing the numerology, juxtaposing the findings with what's been going on in the media. So in that light, I wanted to talk about this riddle I picked up on in the NFL for the Monday night game. On my channel, I made a video on the Packers-Rams game Monday evening before it was played. And I pointed out the riddle with the game, what it was connected to, not only who would win the game, but also who the stars of the game would be. And I was dead right. A.J. Dillon scoring the first 2 touchdowns of the game. He's the guy I talked about in my post and video quite extensively. And what I realize is that the riddle I picked up on for that game actually speaks to something much, much larger. And it's all connected to the Green Bay Packers, the Minnesota Vikings, the 2016 death of Prince, and more syncs with Zach Hubbard, who burst onto the scene in 2016. And we have all these connections with Vikings and Colts that I want to talk about. So this super stream may not be as organized as some of my other ones. I am going to try to put chapters down below, but this is really going to be about examining the whole riddle that goes into this year's Super Bowl. Now, in my conversation with Zach, he had expressed doubt that there was any connection between him and this crash in Florida. And I want to be clear again, when I say connection, I'm suggesting organic synchronicities as much as manufactured ones. You know, one of the things I came across when I first started studying Gematria is that we live in a very magical world, and these alignments we find with numbers extend well beyond the mainstream media and professional sports. This is existent in our own personal lives. And if these types of things are happening to Zach and me, then what disqualifies them from happening to other people who are in the media and playing sports and whatnot? And that's what this is all about, is just examining these syncs and trying to get a little closer to the bottom of the truth here in regards. Now, this was a crash in Florida, and the reason I maintain that this was important and connected to Zach Hubbard is because earlier this year, I met Zach while doing a, on-the-street discussion with students at Marquette University. And a couple weeks after we met, Zach made a video about car crash synchronicities that he had on September 22nd. And that was before he found out that on that same exact day, September 22nd, there was a car crash involving my uncle, and it was actually a fatal crash. And it was on the same date, September 22nd. And after that happened on September 28th, I made this post explaining how this was all connected to the state of Florida. Now, my uncle's vehicle was struck by a dump truck, and back in April, on April 9th, or 4/9 this year, a guy named Dwayne Haskins, a quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers, was in a car accident in Florida, and he was struck by a dump truck and killed. Now, Dwayne Haskins, again, for the Steelers, I mean, he's in his Washington uniform here, but he played for the Steelers. This is going to connect us to the end of this video where we talk about the death of Franco Harris from the Pittsburgh Steelers as well. So, before this crash, my uncle already had connections to Florida. His second wife and her daughter both live in Florida, and then his third wife was named Mickey. And think about Mickey in regards to Disney World being in Florida. My uncle's name sums to 142, just like my name, and Dwayne Haskins died in Fort Lauderdale. And my uncle's crash was 142 days after Dwayne Haskins' crash, or his birthday. On top of this, the crash happened right next to an airport called Clearwater Ranch. And Clearwater is, of course, a city in Florida. The name of the woman who died in the crash was Linda Miller, which has the same gematria as Dwayne Haskins. Now, there's a little bit more that goes into this as well, but what I want to point out, too, is that on Zach Hubbard's 33rd birthday, there was a news story about this man who teaches autistic children accidentally getting shot by the police. And, Zach says he used to teach autistic kids. And the name of the state, Florida, has the same gematria as Zachary Keefe Hubbard. In fact, the city this occurred in also matched Zachary Hubbard. And the guy who was shot had the same gematria, even synced up with Zach's date of birth. So the point I'm making here is that there's been significant syncs with Florida and Zach in the past. So here we get this truck crash in Florida, kind of like a dump truck, but one that carried oil. And this was all the same week that someone uploaded a video calling Zach a snake oil salesman. And, this tripped me out so much that I just had to make a video on it. Again, I wasn't trying to attack anybody, but just bringing up things that were of note. And what's so funny about this is that when I made that video, it happened to be 170 days before my birthday. And that's the number that connects Florida to snake oil salesman to Zachary Keefe Hubbard to moon, 170. And certainly I didn't plan it that way. But this, to an extent, is indeed how the world works. Something else that came up in my conversation with him last week is that, and by the way, a conversation is always good, right? There were a couple things that he brought up on that call that, had we talked 2 months earlier, we could have buried the hatchet on things and figured that all out sooner. So I'm all for communication, and myself as a YouTuber, I might not be the best at that. But the line here is always open, just so he knows. So, okay, where was I going next? This Colts Vikings riddle. Okay, so this takes us into the major story from the NFL this past weekend. On Saturday, the Indianapolis Colts played the Minnesota Vikings. And this is a game that only happens once every 4 years. Now, granted, because the NFL added a game to their schedule, there's now 17 games, right? This 17 number connected to Zach and the moon. So now they played 2 years after their last matchup because they, I guess, finished in the same spot in the division. Now, for many, many years, and especially going back to 2016, there's been a significant amount of discussion regarding the Colts and Vikings in the Super Bowl. Now, this was not necessarily Zach's pick for the Super Bowl back in 2016, but as I've exhibited here, there were many, many posts that talked about mainstream riddles connecting the Colts and Vikings to the Super Bowl. In 2016, former Vikings coach Dennis Green passed away. So did the mayor of St. Paul, 2016, all leading up to that year's Super Bowl. And again, this is just exhibiting that the Vikings and Colts all that year were being discussed. And this even points to a Pawn Stars episode. The 322nd episode of Pawn Stars was called Colts and Vikings. And again, this is strange. This isn't a matchup that happens very often. I don't think there was a Super Bowl Colts and Vikings. As the 2016 season was ending, Zach started to put more and more focus on the Colts because he knew a lot of people had put money on the Colts. This was being discussed ever since he nailed the last Super Bowl before this. So this weekend, the Colts go up 33-0 against the Vikings, only to blow the lead, giving up the largest comeback in NFL history. So let's talk about how this is connected to 2016. Now, in 2016, let me make sure I get my all my proper pages up here. Back in 2016, a car struck Zachary K. Hubbard's house. And this person called it fake. I don't know why, but the point is this happened. And it happened on December 24th of 2016. You may recall there was a YouTuber called Montagraph who told Zach to run the numbers on Christmas Eve. And then, sure enough, a car hits his house while he's out of town. Well, on the same day as this car crash, the Colts and Vikings were both eliminated from the playoffs. And this was all, again, Christmas Eve of 2016. Now, notice here how both the Vikings and Colts scored 25 points in their respective games. This pointed us to the real Super Bowl riddle for Super Bowl 51 that year. Remember, the Patriots came back from 25 points down to beat the Atlanta Falcons in the Super Bowl. That Super Bowl was held on February 5th, or 2-5. It was the year that they moved the touchback to the 25-yard line. It was Tom Brady's 25th playoff win and the AFC's 25th Super Bowl win. This was right after Trump was elected. Trump equals 25. The Pope even spoke before the game at the stadium. Pope equals 25. And think about how Bill Belichick equals the 25th prime number, the coach of the Patriots. The play even ended on a pitch play. Notice how pitch equals 25. And that pitch was to James White. The name White equals 25, and he turned 25 years old 2 days before the Super Bowl. So we had all this focus on the Colts and Vikings, and then they both lose in connection to the Super Bowl riddle. Now, this isn't the first time that the Colts and Vikings were involved in a riddle on Christmas Eve. All the way back in the year 2000, the Colts played the Vikings on Christmas Eve, December 24th. And we're going to talk about this score in a little bit, this 3-11, the 31-10, and how this ties in. Well, in the year 2016, 1 week before they were both eliminated, the Colts played the Vikings. And notice how this game was in Minnesota. And look at how the game played out. The Colts went to halftime with a 27-0 lead. So this game was a blowout at halftime. And that was unexpected because the Colts and Vikings were, they both had the same record. And it was a home game for the Vikings on top of that. So we had this huge blowout at halftime. And the Colts go on to win. Well, now here we are this year, 2022. And basically the same thing happens. 1 week before Christmas Eve, the Colts jump out, this time to a 33-0 lead. However, the Vikings end up coming back and winning this game in overtime. Now, I want to talk about, too, how this is connected to the World Cup. On Discord, during the World Cup game, which started at 9 a.m. Central Time, where I live, I was on Discord talking with some of the people online, and I pointed out that Messi kicked the ball for the first penalty kick with 22 minutes and 22 seconds on the clock. And later on, just a few minutes later, I said, hey, with Messi scoring at 22-22, I wonder if they'll have France come back 2-2. And I also said they'll also come back and make it 3-3 at the end of extra time. And people were doubting me, calling me crazy and whatever, but that's exactly what happened. And that's because the World Cup final was all completely connected to this Vikings-Colts game. And, after this, everyone's, trying to figure out how I knew it. Well, because I've been paying attention to the script. That's really all there is to it. So this 33-point comeback connected to the 3-3 World Cup final completely. So earlier this season, the Vikings came back to beat the Buffalo Bills in what was called the Game of the Year. I did a whole video and post on that. And that game stood out because the Bills, who they defeated, had previously completed the biggest comeback in NFL history. And that was against the Houston Oilers back in '93. Well, in this game, the Vikings beat the Colts, who had just replaced coach Frank Reich, who was the quarterback for the biggest comeback with the Bills. Frank Reich was replaced by Jeff Saturday, and this game was held on a Saturday. It was called Saturday Showdown on NFL. So all of this seems to connect somehow, and I want to talk about this because one more post that Zach had here is that for the 2017 season, he noted that the Colts and Vikings both finished 8-8, and both of the teams they defeated in the last week finished with a record of 3-13. Well, if you fast forward 313 weeks from this Colts-Vikings game back in 2016 to the Colts-Vikings comeback this year and the World Cup final, it was 313 weeks later. And remember how the World Cup won by Argentina, which is home of the Pope. The Pope became the Pope on 3/13/13. The Pope's name is Francis. His home country of Argentina beat France. So this brings us back to the year 2000. And the reason I point this out is because, again, this game was also on Christmas Eve, the same date, exactly 16 years before the crash into Zach Hubbard's house. Now, when you write out the number 33, it sums to 156. And think about how the factors of 33 are 11 times 3. So this game from 2000 finishes with a score of 31-10. Like 311, the factors of 33. This car crash into Zach's house happened exactly 156 days after his 33rd birthday. And again, 33 is 156. We commonly talk about how this is a number connected to false flags. Now, personally, if I was trying to discredit someone, I might set up a fake false flag. So, I don't think you can draw any conclusions from this. But it's very strange, isn't it? So, there's so much more. The reason I say Zach Hubbard is connected to 2016 and 216 is because of his full name. So we mentioned how this 170 connects to moon, because moon is 170. Now, in that Latin method, Zach's name sums to the 216th prime number, and it was the year 2016 where he really burst onto the scene, decoding sports. And how interesting is it, too, that, after I made this video about the truck crash, and then we get the Vikings-Colts comeback, now they're saying NFL rigged was trending on Twitter. And I don't remember the last time this has happened, but 3 days ago, after this last week's games, NFL rigged was trending on Twitter. And think about how it was Zach who woke us up to the NFL rigging, right? So not only am I going to double down on the fact that this crash was connected completely by the numbers. I mean, his name was even, the number of his name was even in the headline, but I'm going to triple down on it. There's a strong riddle going on here. And I think it's also connected to the death of Prince, which is part of the reason why Zach burst onto the scene and became viral to an extent. This 113 was a big number as well, connected to the World Cup. Now, you may remember that on the 11th of March, or 11/3 in the year 2020, is when the World Health Organization first declared a coronavirus pandemic, which sums to 11/13. Sorry, 1/13. Well, if you measure from that date to the date of the World Cup final, notice how you get 1,013 days. Messi's first goal on the penalty was his 113th career international goal, if you include his youth career. The guy who clinched the game with the last penalty kick was 311 months old. This is a big moon number because the Earth is 11/3 the size of the moon. The coach of Argentina, his name sums to 113. And remember, the number 113 has the same gematria as the moon, 99 and 90. And measuring from the car crash at Zach's old house to the date of the World Cup final, we get exactly 74 lunar phases. And remember, Zach brought gematria to the conscience. Gematria equals 74. Also, the Vikings recently had a death connected to the team. I made a really good video on the death of Adam Zimmer and how it was connected to the moon and Bob Dylan. Check out my channel for that. Notice his birthday, 1/13, January 13th. So the Vikings are an absolutely massive part of this year's Super Bowl riddle. Oh, and I forgot to mention, when I was looking for video on the car crash into Zach's house, I actually found this story from November, just last month, 11/11. Where a car not only crashed into a house, but it hit an embankment, hit a tree, and then flipped over and landed in the attic of a house. And this happened in Zachary, Louisiana. I was like, are you kidding me? And this was 11/11, the big wake-up number? Again, only Zach knows truly if he's working for someone else. Again, I don't think he is. So I hope this trips him out sufficiently enough to say, to kind of take a different view on things. That's all I'm after. I'm not trying to bash anybody or change anyone's mind. I'm just bringing things into light that I think will help us clear some unblurred lines or blurred lines as it is. Just wild stuff. So, speaking of moon and football and comebacks, this brings us to Warren Moon. Now, earlier I mentioned the Bills' comeback against the Oilers in the 1992-93 playoffs. Well, the quarterback who gave up that comeback was named Warren Moon. And now this year is the year of Super Bowl 57, and Moon equals 57. Now, Warren Moon lost this game against the Bills as the Bills were on their way to Super Bowl 27, and the Moon equals 27. All right. Forgive me, guys, while I try to find my place here. Again, we're talking about so many things connected to the NFL that, oops. I want to make sure I do this in the best order possible. So, as always, we're live here, so little technical snafu. So, we'll get this squared up soon. All right. So let's take a look at some of the basic numerology here for Super Bowl 57. I'm going to start out with this fentanyl riddle. The Super Bowl 57 halftime performer will be Rihanna this year. And if you want more information on this, I direct you to Rambo's channel at The Truth Codes. He's done a whole lot of work on the Super Bowl and the symbolism that goes into the halftime show. This big birthing ritual that seems to be going on. And it's all centered around Rihanna, who's been really one of the biggest music stars for the past 10, 15 years. So in my decode for the Packers-Rams game, I talked about how it was a riddle connected to this middle eclipse over India. That middle eclipse occurred on the 21st of June, and it began lunation 1206, which has the same 4 digits as the date, 1, 2, and 6. And the more I thought about it, the more this stood out, because it's Revelation 6:12 that talks about both a solar and lunar eclipse. So this is already an eclipse number, and this middle eclipse, which only happens once or twice a century, has these numbers. Now, this year's Super Bowl falls 612 days after the crown eclipse. So what is the crown eclipse? Back on June of 2021, there was a solar eclipse that began just north of Green Bay and Minnesota. In fact, these are really two of the only states that would have seen any of the eclipse. Green Bay and Minnesota. This is called the crown eclipse because notice how the path of annularity passed almost directly past the North Pole. This is also called the first arch eclipse. And that's really relevant here. We'll talk about that in a second. So this eclipse was 612 days before the Super Bowl. And since the crown eclipse, we had the death of the Queen, Queen Elizabeth. And now we have a new king named Charles. Maybe he's a queen, I don't know. And Charles is the middle name of Aaron Rodgers. However, Minneapolis is home to the 612 dialing code. Fentanyl 612 in Gematria. And it was fentanyl that killed Prince. Remember, Zach called Prince's death a couple months before it happened. And then Prince died, and that's part of the reason he got big. Well, notice how Rihanna's real last name is Fenty. A lot like fentanyl. And to make this even wilder is that the name Rihanna sums to 38, which is the same as fentanyl in reverse. We're talking about a potential Minnesota riddle. Minnesota equals 38. And notice how fentanyl and Prince share the same gematria. Prince also with this 38. 38 also the value of murder and death. And as we go, we're also going to talk about a riddle connected to the Packers and how, despite their woes, despite how crazy it sounds, there is a riddle for the Packers to go to the Super Bowl this year. And I think it's just a matter of who picks up on it, how many people find out. But we'll talk about that more as we go. Notice how the name Prince Rogers Nelson sums to 226 in the alphabetic order, which is a number of sacrifice. Of course, he's got the middle name Rogers, the last name Nelson. Long story short is that Aaron Rodgers got his 156th win on Monday night against the Rams, who are the defending Super Bowl champions. 156 is the major eclipse number, and the Rams even only had 156 yards in this game. But check out how Prince Rogers Nelson equals 156, like Ritual Sacrifice and Super Bowl 57. The 156th prime is 9/11. Rodgers got his 156th win 911 days after the eclipse over Uttarakhand, India, which sums to 156. Remember, Uttarakhand was founded on 11/9. Uttarakhand equals 119. If I'm going too fast through anything, do understand my blog is linked below. You can find all of these posts there. And here's another look at this eclipse over India, June 21st of 2020, a middle eclipse, which so significant. This was the first one in almost 30 years. So, let's talk again about Super Bowl 57. Now, this game will be a complete riddle for the moon. Think about how Prince died at the age of 57. And when he died, it was the Queen's 90th birthday, April 21st of 2016. Elizabeth II, born on April 21st, exactly 90 years earlier. So 57 and 90. Moon equals 57. The moon equals 90. In Hebrew Gematria, the moon equals 223, and this Super Bowl will be played on a date with 57 numerology in the year 2023. 57 date, Super Bowl 57, the date leaving 322 days in the year 2023. In Hebrew Gematria, the word for eclipse sums to 57. And I think that this crown eclipse is going to point to the riddle for this game. Again, this is an arch eclipse. And would you believe the St. Louis Arch was built in connection to this eclipse? The shape of the arch is very similar to these arch shapes. And it was built to commemorate east to west expansion. Well, arch eclipses at the pole are the only eclipses that travel east to west. It's usually west to east. The Gateway Arch was inaugurated on June 10th, 1967, which was exactly 54 years before this arch eclipse. And notice how arch eclipse equals 54, pole eclipse 54 and 54, sun arches and sun arches, all 54. In fact, it was even the year 67 when the St. Louis Arch opened, and St. Louis, Missouri equals 67, like total solar eclipse, 67. And think about the team that used to play in St. Louis. It was the Rams. Well, they moved to LA, they win the Super Bowl, and then they lose to the Packers in a major eclipse riddle on Monday night that I picked out even before the game. Now, did you know that there's a current prince named Archie? That's right. So after the death of Prince, before the arch eclipse, we get the birth of a new prince named Archie. Now check this out. If you take his full name, it's 235 in Latin Gematria. This is a number connected to the moon because the Metonic cycle is defined as 235 lunar phases, or synodic months. The name Archie even equals 235 with capital letters. And if you measure from the birth of Archie to the arch eclipse, it's 2 years and 35 days. In fact, this arch eclipse was even on the 10th of June, which would be written 10-6 in the United Kingdom. The name Archie equals 106, like 10-6. Consider how the Packers game against the Rams this past Monday night, they went to halftime with a score of 10-6. So here's the big thing that connects Rodgers to Nelson, or Prince to the Packers, I should say. And sorry if I'm mixing my words up more than I usually do in this video, but the connections are stronger than I can even communicate. So back in 2016, we had the opening of US Bank Stadium in Minnesota. This was in 2016, which is the same year that Prince died. The first NFL game held in this stadium was on September 18th that year. And the first touchdown scored in the stadium was a pass from Rodgers to Nelson. From Aaron Rodgers to Jordy Nelson. And remember, Prince, his full name is Prince Rodgers Nelson. There's another strange connection here with the Vikings to Wisconsin. So the current quarterback of the Vikings is Kirk Cousins. And Kirk Cousins has another relative who is also a pro athlete, Jake Cousins, who is his cousin. And Jake Cousins pitches for the Milwaukee Brewers, which is the baseball team in Wisconsin, whereas the Packers represent Wisconsin in football. So there's this odd connection with these two. And Kirk Cousins is heavily coded with the number 8. He was born in the 8th month in the year 88. He wears number 8. His name sums to 888. The 8th prime is 19, and he was even born on the 19th day of the month. Now, when Prince Rodgers Nelson died, Kirk Cousins was 10,108 days old. And the name Prince Rodgers Nelson sums to 118, just like death and homicide. This prince's name, Archie, equals 118, all pointing to a riddle for the NFC North. If you measure from the birthdays of Jordy Nelson to Aaron Rodgers, you even get 1 year, 180 days, 118. But as far as the 180, the name Prince Nelson sums to 180 and also 1080, which is connected to the moon. Now, just as another caveat, I'm going to talk about the Packers a lot and their riddle for going to the Super Bowl. Now, I live in southeast Wisconsin, so the Packers are the team that I grew up living and dying with. So, might there be a little bit of bias? Yeah, absolutely. I'm certainly, I do more decodes on the Packers than any other team, no doubt about it. However, the Packers aren't just any team. You know, this is the most storied franchise in NFL history with the most titles. Rodgers, a 4-time MVP, 2-time defending MVP. And wouldn't it kind of make sense to tease the Packer fans with all these number 1 seeds for so many years, only to have them win when they're the worst seed? Also, consider how the last time the Packers won the Super Bowl, it was 12 years ago. And the number 12 is so big right now. Of course, this is the number that Aaron Rodgers wears. And when the Packers won the Super Bowl that year, they had to win 6 in a row, including their last 2 regular seasons games. They snuck in as the 6th seed, they won out in the playoffs and won the Super Bowl. And that's essentially the same thing that would happen this year, except now instead of winning 6 in a row, they would have to win 9 in a row. 6 and 9, like Eclipse 69. This is going to be the Big Eclipse Bowl. Another thing I want to point out is that I truly believe that although sports are scripted, Vegas has the finals call. And while Vegas is willing to lose money, sometimes in order to carry out their rituals, if 10,000 people go and put $1,000 on the Packers today, the Packers ain't winning the Super Bowl, or they ain't even going. I think that's how sports are worked. So, you know, I'm not telling anyone to throw their savings on anything. I think that would be pretty foolish. Just be smart about your money. Remember, sports were not legalized so you could get rich. Back to Prince Nelson, whose name sums to 1080 in reverse Sumerian. This is the equatorial radius of the moon, 1080 miles. Meaning, once again, the moon is 2160 miles across. Now, these are the same digits found in the year 2016, which is the year that Prince died and US Bank Stadium opened. So, 2016 is a triangular number. I said prime number in my post, but that's wrong. It's a triangular. The 63rd triangular number. And check this out. The name Prince Nelson sums to 63 and 63. Arch Eclipse sums to 63. And on the date of this Arch Eclipse, Prince had would have turned 63 years old just 3 days earlier. June 7th, 1958, so his 63rd birthday fell just 3 days before this eclipse. And Prince has the 6-7 birthday to go along with St. Louis, Missouri, 67. Notice how Aaron Rodgers equals 63, so does Jordy. And when they threw the touchdown pass from Rodgers to Nelson to open the stadium, it was on a date with 63 numerology. Check out how the name Prince Nelson has the same English gematria as annular. Annular sums to 522, just like Prince Nelson, who died in connection to this annular eclipse. Something else that sums to 522 is the number 12 in Sumerian. Notice how 12 equals 522. This is the number that Rodgers wears. He won the Super Bowl 12 years ago. This year's Super Bowl falls on a date with numerology of 12. And it will be the first Super Bowl played on the 12th day of the month in 48 years. And when we talk about the moon, consider how in Latin, the moon is called Luna. And Luna equals 12 and 48. Before the Packers started winning at the end of the season, they fell to a record of 4-8. And it was against Philadelphia when they lost. And Philadelphia equals the 48th prime number. I'm telling you guys, it's all fallen into place. This arch eclipse that started over Minnesota and Green Bay was exactly 12 lunar phases after the Indian eclipse, which got a big riddle in the big Monday Night Football game. And if you watch that game on Monday night, I pointed out how there were 2 touchdowns scored by A.J. Dillon. And both of those touchdowns, a lineman wearing number 73 came by and picked him up into the air. And that lineman, Yash Neiman, now, this is the closest I've ever seen to an Indian name in the NFL, isn't it? And he wears number 73, which is the number connected to India in multiple ciphers. India equals 73 and 73, just like Packers, 73. So I thought that was pretty funny. Anyway, so this eclipse was 12 lunar phases after the eclipse over India. And notice how eclipse equals 120. And the game against the Rams was on the date leaving 12 days in the year. The Packers gave up 12 points. They won by 12. That means they scored 24. And when you write out 12, it equals 24. The losing quarterback of that game was Baker Mayfield. And check out Baker Mayfield's birthday, the 14th of April, 14-4, like the number 144, which is both the 12th Fibonacci and the 12th square number. 144 is also the ordinal gematria of Prince Nelson, 144. Now this is where things... I guess things already got weird a long time ago, but you may recall that Prince's death was scripted through his own music. That's right. Back in the year 1995, Prince released a song called 319. And in Satanic Gematria, the word killing sums to 319. Not only did Prince die 319 days after his birthday, but he was also 3,019 weeks old. This will take us into the riddle with Don Shula. Shula equals 319. But check out the track number of this song. 319 was the 12th track. And if you measure from the release of this album to the Super Bowl, it's 10,002 days, like the number 12. This year's Super Bowl is also 102 days after Matt LaFleur's birthday. He's the coach of the Packers. And think about the name of this album, The Gold Experience. Gold is one of the Packers' colors. Green and gold, they say. So as I've been pointing out a lot, Baker Mayfield is extremely connected to Ronald Reagan. His middle name is Reagan, whereas Reagan's middle name is Wilson, which is the name on an NFL football. So Prince died on the 112th day of a leap year, 112. And this is a number connected to Ronald Reagan, who was exactly 1,120 months old when he died. Reagan was born in Tampico, which equals 112. Ronald Reagan turns 112 weeks old, or would, less than a week before this year's Super Bowl. And look at how Super Bowl equals 112. The name Baker Mayfield equals 112. So does Baker Reagan Mayfield, 112. The Vikings quarterback, Kirk Daniel Cousins, also has the 112. In his game against the Packers on Monday night, Baker Mayfield was 10,112 days old. His coach, Sean McVay, was born exactly 112 weeks after Aaron Rodgers. And Aaron Rodgers' coach, Matt LaFleur, was born on a date with 112 numerology. Baker Mayfield has always been linked to the Packers. You may recall that on draft day, when Baker Mayfield was selected, notice he recreated Brett Favre's draft photo. And notice the date that Brett Favre was drafted, the date that's written on these people's shirts behind him. It says draft day 4/21. 4/21. Like the date that Prince died, 4/21. The birthday of the Queen. And then Baker Mayfield pays homage. And of course, Favre, the last quarterback of the Packers before Aaron Rodgers. Now, these two men are born 1,331 weeks apart exactly. That's the major eclipse number. I've talked about this number at length in many videos. And it's also the average of the gematria of Cleveland Browns and Brett Lorenzo Favre. So these people are telling us something. It's just a matter of how many steps away from this riddle we need to go. All right, guys. Trying to figure out what to talk about next. All right, let's talk about Archie Mountbatten Windsor, the royal prince with the name Archie, connected to the Archie clips. So the number 197 is very significant to the moon. First of all, in satanic gematria, the word moon equals 197. Every 19 years, 7 of them contain a 13th month. And this gives us the metonic cycle. And when you write out metonic cycle, it sums to 197. And the metonic cycle takes 19 years. And when you write out 19 years, it sums to 197. And again, every 19 years, 7 of them have a 13th month. And the phrase 13th month equals 197. With capital letters, arch eclipse sums to 197. And in Latin gematria, prince equals 197. If you measure from the date that Archie Mountbatten Windsor was born, the new prince, to the date of the Super Bowl, it's exactly 197 weeks. Prince died 1,097 weeks after the birthday of Baker Mayfield. And Baker Mayfield was born exactly 1,923 weeks after Prince. 1923 is the year that we began using the Brown lunation number. And Baker Mayfield was drafted by the Browns. When this Prince Archie was born, Baker Mayfield was 24 years and 22 days old. And the numbers 24 and 22 have been coded around Baker Mayfield for a couple years now. Consider how all of these games involving the Cleveland Browns finished with a score of 24-22 over the past year or two. First, it was the Browns against the Packers on Christmas last year. This was less than a year after the Browns beat the Steelers 24-22 on the last game of the season. And then 2 weeks before their trip to Lambeau, the Browns beat the Ravens 24-22. And why is this number so significant? Well, if you look at the 2 Great American Total Solar Eclipses that pass over the United States in 2017 and 2024, these eclipses are separated by 2,422 days. And last year, we had a tornado in Mayfield, Kentucky, and Mayfield is right near the halfway point of these eclipses, or the intersection, I should say. Mayfield, Kentucky. Now, half of the number 2422 is 1211, and the Mayfield tornado happened on the date 1211 last year. These eclipses are also separated by 82 lunar phases, and 82 connects us back to Prince because the date he died, 4/21, this is the 82nd prime number. This year's Super Bowl falls 421 days before the second Great American Eclipse, which is on April 8th. And notice how on that date we have a total eclipse from Saros, 139. Well, 139 stands out because Green Bay sums to 139 in reverse. So does the number 57, summing to 139. Now think about how the Packers logo is a G, which is the same letter that sits in the middle of the logo of Freemasonry. Freemasonry sums to 139. Freemasonry very fond of the sun, the moon, eclipse codes. A couple weeks ago, the Packers earned their 787th franchise victory, which allowed them to surpass the Chicago Bears for the first time in over 100 years. And they defeated the Bears to do it. When they got their 787th win, it was also a game that made them 5-8 on the season. That was their record, 5-8, like 58. But what about this 158? 158 is the full gematria of Baker Reagan Mayfield, his full name summing to 158. He's got a lot of 77 connections here too, but Freemasonry is the 138th prime number. And this year's Super Bowl falls 138 weeks after the middle eclipse from June of 2020 over India. And we're going to talk more about that number in a second. Bear with me momentarily here while I bring up some new pages for us to kind of review here. So, here's the thing, and again, I know it sounds crazy to say the Packers are going to win 9 games in a row to get to the Super Bowl, but this is one of the riddles, and it's just a matter of whether they pull the trigger on it or if they go ahead and have Minnesota go instead. I'm not sure. Again, you guys can bet with your own money. So Aaron Rodgers' middle name is Charles. And think about how we got a new king named Charles this year. That happened less than a month before we got a new home run king. And the original home run king was Hank Aaron. And now Aaron Judge broke the American League home run record. This year's Super Bowl takes place in the year 2023, and when Charles became the new king, Aaron Rodgers was exactly 2,023 weeks old. Consider how last year's Super Bowl 56, ended with a score of 23-20, right? Like 20-23. Now, the last time the Packers won the Super Bowl, they played the Miami Dolphins and lost 20-23 in overtime. And there's a strong riddle with the Dolphins, as we'll see. Queen Elizabeth died on September 8th, or 9/8, this year. If the Packers win out to make the playoffs, they'll have to get a record of 9-8. And check out how Super Bowl 57 equals 98 when you write out the number or the letters. The country of India equals 98 in multiple ciphers. Prince Rogers Nelson equals 98. And so does annular solar eclipse, 98. So I thought about this a little bit. I said, okay, is it possible that the Packers go perfect from here on out? And I always thought it was interesting that the word perfect matches Packers, right? 73 and 116. And this game had everything to do with 73 because, again, it was connected to the eclipse over India, 73. And then we got the lineman wearing number 73, celebrating with the running back. So the same date of this game, December 19th, when the Packers defeated the Rams, a Major League pitcher died at the young age of 62. His name was Tom Browning. And consider Brown in connection to the Brown lunation number, the moon. This guy was a pitcher for the Cincinnati Reds, and Cincinnati is totally coded with numbers of the Metonic cycle. First of all, Cincinnati equals 254, which is the number of sidereal months in the Metonic cycle. Cincinnati, Ohio equals 235, the number of lunar phases in the Metonic cycle. And Tom Browning died 235 days after his birthday. But what makes this so wild is that Tom Browning is one of just 23 pitchers in Major League history to have thrown a perfect game. And he did it against Los Angeles. And he died the same day that the Packers beat Los Angeles on Monday night. So then I got to thinking, wait a minute, who was the guy who coached the Dolphins to a perfect season? Don Shula, who just recently died back in 2020. And I said, okay, if this guy's lined up with the Packers, then there's something to it. And my God, I couldn't believe it. I pointed out how Packers and Uttarakhand in my video both summed to 145. And this was Aaron Rodgers' 145th regular season win. Well, the word perfect also equals 145. And the Super Bowl falls 145 weeks after the death of Don Shula, who coached the Dolphins, and Dolphins also equals 145. The name of this pitcher, Tom Browning, Notice how his name equals 150, which is like annular eclipse, and Green Bay Packers, 150. The word moon also 150 reverse. Now, 3 weeks ago, when the Packers got their 787th win to beat the Bears, I pointed out how it was a riddle connected to Francis Xavier. Watch my Superstream number 42 to learn more about that. Francis Xavier was all over the news that weekend, and that was because it was the 470th anniversary of his death. Francis equals 47, like Vatican, and the Packers and Bears combined for 47 points in that game. Well, check out the middle name of Don Shula. His middle name is Francis. And the only other team that Don Shula coached before the Dolphins was the Colts. And remember, the Colts just lost to the Vikings in that big NFL comeback. Notice how Don Shula was born on January 4th, or 1-4. The Packers are looking for their 14th NFL championship. When they beat the Rams, it was the 14th game of the year. And when Don Shula coached the Dolphins to a perfect season, that was back when there were only 14 games in the regular season. This year's Super Bowl will be played on the 43rd day of the year. And notice how 43 is the 14th prime number. Dolphins equals 43. So does Miami Dolphins, 430. The only team to ever finish perfect. And if you measure from the death of Don Shula to the date of the crown eclipse, notice how he died 403 days before that crown eclipse. Now, Don Shula's perfect season was in the year 1972. And 1972 is the year of the Immaculate Reception. Yesterday, we learned that Franco Harris, whose number is set to be retired in 2 days, he was the man who made the Immaculate Reception, and he just died. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. So Shula's perfect season ended in 1973 with Super Bowl VII. Super Bowl VII held on the, look at that, the 14th day of 73. The 14th day. We just talked about that. And the Dolphins scored 14 points. Oh my God. So 1973. Well, the first number that sums to 1973 is 137. And this is on top of the fact that the word perfect equals 73. But 173 or 137 summing to 1973. And the word perfection equals 137 with capital letters. So does the word eclipse. And my video on the Rams-Packers game explained how that was connected to the solar eclipse from Saros 137. It just so happens that Don Shula died 1 year and 37 days before the crown eclipse. And look at how crown also equals 73. 73, 1073, 703 for crown. And if you measure from Don Shula's death to the date of the Rams-Packers game, you even get exactly 137 weeks. All connected to perfection. Notice how middle eclipse sums to 116, just like the word perfect, just like Packers. The name Reagan is 116, so is the name Archie, 116. And Monday night's game against the Rams, let me show you guys. This is so crazy. December 19th of 2022. It was 1 year, 16 days after the last total solar eclipse. And if you measure to the next total solar eclipse, it was exactly 1 year, 16 weeks earlier. And then if you measure to Baker Mayfield's next birthday, the opposing quarterback, you even get 116 days. Donald Francis Shula in Gematria sums to 73 in reduction, just like the word perfect. Again, India 73, which is where the middle eclipse occurred. The word crown with triple Gematria of 73. This year's Super Bowl falls a span of 73 days after Aaron Rodgers' birthday. Now, without the end date, it's 72 days. And Don Shula's perfect season was in 72, like the year of the Immaculate Reception. Now, the number 72 is a very big moon number. And this is all connected to the golden ratio. Golden ratio equals 720. It's the golden ratio that essentially solves the mathematics between the Earth and the moon. Think about how we had the first ever moon landing on 720. The Earth and moon are both 360-degree objects, so that's 720 degrees. The moon and sun both occupy 0.5 degrees, or 1/720th of the sky. We count our new moons with the Brown lunation number. Eclipses can be predicted thanks to the Saros cycle. Brown and Saros both equal 72. So this brings us to Jordy Nelson. Jordy equals 72, the guy who shares a name with Prince. And Jordy Nelson was born just 6 days after Kevin O'Connell, who is the current head coach of the Minnesota Vikings. These two men were born during lunation 772, and the name Kevin O'Connell equals 772. Jordy Nelson will be 13,772 days old for the Super Bowl. So my point being here that there's double coding with the Packers and Vikings, again, with the moon. Now, Nelson will also be 504 lunar orbits old, and 54 is a number that connects Green Bay to Miami, to Uttarakhand, to the sun. Sun arches, arch eclipse, etc., all 54. Remember, the Gateway Arch opened 54 years before the arch eclipse. Aaron Rodgers from Green Bay was born 540 days before Kevin O'Connell. The name Jordy Nelson stands out for another reason. Look at Jordy Nelson's middle name. Notice how his middle name is Ray. Well, we just had the World Cup final, and it was won by Argentina. Argentina's flag has a sun with rays emanating from it. And exactly like the Jesuit order's sun, there's 32 rays emanating from these suns. Well, when you write out the number 32, it sums to 1967. And Jordy Nelson will be 1,967 weeks old for the Super Bowl. Also, regarding the number 32, the number of rays in the sun, Minnesota was admitted as the 32nd state. And this will also connect us to Franco Harris, who wore number 32. Franco set to have his number 32 retired by the Steelers right before he died. I want to look again at the word perfection, which sums to 57. Remember, Prince died at the age of 57. Here we are for Super Bowl 57. Perfection, 57. Well, in ordinal, perfection equals 111. And remember the new prince, Archie Mountbatten Windsor. His name equals 111. And he was born 1,110 days after Prince. Minnesota Vikings also 1,110 in Gematria. So, at one point, like I mentioned earlier, the Packers fell to 4-8 on the season. And that game was against Philadelphia. Philadelphia summing to the 48th prime number. Luna equals 48. The moon equals 223. So, the Packers would then have to win 9 straight. And the number 9 stood out to me for a few reasons. First of all, Don Shula died at the age of 90. A lot like the number 9. The moon equals 9. And soon we'll be talking about Franco Harris. And Franco Harris was the MVP of Super Bowl 9. Franco Harris won 4 Super Bowls. Aaron Rodgers won 4 MVPs. So check out the game against the Eagles, though, with the Packers. They lost by a score of 33-40. or 40 to 33. And this number is so big. When Rodgers threw to Nelson to open US Bank Stadium, it was 334 weeks before the Super Bowl. Prince Archie was born 334 days after Prince's birthday. Ronald Reagan died 3,340 days after Baker Mayfield was born. The phrase solar eclipse equals 433 in Latin. Ronald Reagan would have been 40,303 days old on the date of the Archie eclipse. Packers coach Matt LaFleur was born exactly 433 weeks before Rihanna, the Super Bowl halftime performer. And then we got the death of Tom Browning, who threw a perfect game for the Cincinnati Reds. Cincinnati Reds equals 433. This number is also connected to Kirk Cousins. Measuring from the Super Bowl to the date that Kirk Cousins signed with the Minnesota Vikings was 4 years, 334 days. Now, 433 is the 84th prime number. Cousins' contract was worth $84 million. And this is a number that's connected to Green Bay Packers 84, Annular Eclipse 84, the Jesuit Order, Masonry, Solar Eclipse, the Jesuits, and finally Rihanna's full name, all connecting to the number 84, which point to this big 433, the 344 alignment. So I made that post on the perfect season, right? I made that post on December 20th. The very next day, we find out that Franco Harris died. And I got to clean up my tabs again. Bear with me for a moment. So here we get the death of Franco Harris. And so this is so crazy because you don't even need numerology to talk about this. I mean, what's going on here? The Steelers wanted to retire Franco Harris's number. Mind you, this is like 40 years after he left the team. And they wanted to do it on the anniversary of the Immaculate Reception. And it just so happens that the Steelers play the Raiders on that date. Now, the fact that the Steelers play the Raiders on the anniversary of the Immaculate Reception, that alone is worth a decode. Then the Steelers decided to retire Harris's number during the game, which, again, would have been a decode on its own. But then Franco Harris died just before the game. So if this doesn't wake people up, I'm not sure what will, especially with all the shenanigans that have been occurring in the NFL and the World Cup and all these super close games that have been taking place. Oh, I finally did it. I opened too many tabs. So we're going to have to close some here. Just a sec. Now let's talk about some of the connections here. Now, not only do the Raiders play the Steelers coming up, but this past week, the Raiders had one of the wildest finishes in NFL history, which kind of reminded us of the Immaculate Reception, which they were on the other end of. And in this game, the Patriots, who Chandler Jones used to play for some reason, they were trying to run a lateral, even though they didn't need to score to win. And in doing so, they threw to this guy on the wrong team. And Chandler Jones, who used to play for the Patriots, ran over Mac Jones. So you have a guy who used to wear a Patriots jersey with the name Jones, and he ran over a guy in a Patriots jersey wearing Jones to score this touchdown. Franco Harris was a running back at Penn State. And even though he played back in the 60s and 70s in college, believe it or not, the coach at the time was still Joe Paterno, who died in 2012. And first I want to talk about how Franco Harris's death is completely connected to Joe Paterno. Consider how we learned about the death of Franco Harris on December 21st, one day after he died, allegedly. And December 21st is the birthday of Joe Paterno, his coach at Penn State. I want to point out first that Franco Harris died 77 days before his birthday, and Franco Harris equals 77. This is also a number connecting Green Bay, 77, to Kirk Daniel Cousins, and then we'll talk about why Christ and Mary tie into this as well. Okay, so before I get to Joe Paterno, I want to talk more about how this connects to Rodgers and the number 12. Franco Harris finished his professional football career with 12,120 yards. And how interesting is that? Because his quarterback for the Steelers, Terry Bradshaw, wore number 12, the guy who also won 4 championships with him. So number 12 here is big, and we're talking about how this connects to Aaron Rodgers, right? Well, Aaron Rodgers was born in the 12th month. He wears number 12. Franco Harris, 12,120 yards. He dies in the 12th month. The Packers just gave up 12 points and won by 12 on the date leaving 12 days in the year. Franco Harris dies on a date with 12 numerology, and it was also 12 days before his alma mater, Penn State, plays in the Rose Bowl on 1/2, which is also a date with numerology of 12. So it's all coming up 12s, and this connects us to Joe Paterno. The name Joe equals 12, and Joe Paterno's full name also equals 102. So check this out. Back in 2019, there was an eclipse that started on Christmas Day. And here we're talking about the Immaculate Reception, which is connected to the Immaculate Conception. The Immaculate Conception of Mary for Jesus Christ. The Immaculate Reception, having just a couple days before Christmas. Well, on Christmas, we had the solar eclipse begin in 2019, an annular eclipse. Now, the technical date of this eclipse is the 26th, which was the UTC time of the eclipse. Notice the 77 numerology connecting to Christ. But what's so interesting about this eclipse is that it began brown lunation 1200, which reflects the number 12. And measuring from that eclipse to the death of Franco Harris, when it made the news, 1,092 days or 156 weeks. And guys, what bigger eclipse numbers are there than 156 and 192? 156 Hebrew, 192 Latin. So, his death makes the news on December 21st, the winter solstice. December 21st, also the birthday of his former coach, Joe Paterno. Now, notice how Joe Paterno died 33 days after his birthday. The name Joe equals 30, and the name Franco equals 30 in reduction. Franco Harris died 333 days after the anniversary of Joe Paterno's death. Notice how Penn State equals 33, and the name Franco also equals 33. Measuring from the anniversary of Penn State University to the death of Franco Harris is 303 days. And he died in 2022. Penn State was founded on 2/22, February 22nd. But look at these deaths. Paterno died on 1/22 in 2012. Well, Franco Harris died on 12/20 or 2012. So the digits in this date are virtually identical to the digits in Paterno's date. But think more about this date, right? 12/21. The 12th prime number is 37, and the 21st prime number is 73. The name Harris equals 37 and 73. This is connected to Paterno, whose first name is Joseph, which equals 37 and 73. Remember how sacrifice and ritual sacrifice both equals 73. And Franco Harris was born on the date written 3/7 or 7/3, and he died shortly before his 73rd birthday. These numbers are also found in the Gematria of Packers and Perfect. Packers 3773, Perfect 3773. The Immaculate Reception was in the same year as the Dolphins' perfect season, which ended in 73. There's also a riddle connected to the other sports team from Wisconsin, the Milwaukee Bucks, who won the championship in 2021. The Bucks are led by another MVP, a two-time league MVP named Giannis. Notice how Giannis equals 37 and 73. We'll talk about how this is connected to the Bucks now in a minute. Before I point that out, notice how the name Franco Harris sums to 130. And this is a number that's already connected to the NFL, which equals 13. Notice how Franco Harris was the 13th pick in the NFL draft. He was drafted by the team in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which equals 103. Pittsburgh equals 130. Steelers equals 103. Human sacrifice 130. Don't forget Christ equals 103 with capital letters. And the initials of Christ are JC or 10-3. Franco Harris went on to play a total of 13 seasons in the NFL. So the Immaculate Reception was a riddle for the Immaculate Conception. And notice how Immaculate Conception equals 212. And that's the date of this year's Super Bowl. This year's Super Bowl is Super Bowl 57, and it was Mary who received the Immaculate Conception so she could give birth to Christ. Birth equals 57. The name Franco equals 57. When you write out Jesus Christ, notice how you get this value of 43. Well, not only do we have the Immaculate Reception in Steelers history, but we also have the Immaculate Interception. Right before halftime, in Super Bowl 43, a man named James Harrison. And think about the name Harrison in connection to Franco Harris, right? Very similar last name. Well, the Immaculate Interception was thrown against the Arizona Cardinals, or by the Arizona Cardinals. And Arizona is the host of this year's Super Bowl. And this year's Super Bowl is on the 43rd day of the year. The Immaculate Interception was in Super Bowl 43. If you measure from Super Bowl 43 to the death of Franco Harris, you get 5,070 days. That 57, like Franco. And again, this is all connected to Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ equals 43. Super Bowl 43, the Immaculate Interception. So another 57 is Milwaukee Bucks. Now, I want to talk about how this connects to the Bucks. First of all, when we're talking about Jesus Christ, it's all about the number 74. Jesus 74, like the King, Messiah 74, and Jesus Christ equals 74. Well, this year, Franco Harris died on a date with numerology of 74. And news of his death fell 7 weeks and 4 days before the Super Bowl. Isn't it interesting that Joe Paterno died 74 days after being dismissed from Penn State, which is something they had to point out here in Wikipedia? I don't think I would have known this had they not pointed it out. Measuring from the death of Franco Harris back to the 2021 NBA Finals, when the Bucks clinched the championship, was exactly 74 weeks. And the Bucks championship was connected to the moon as well. Remember, this was the first NBA Finals to conclude in July, and the Bucks championship fell just 3 days before the Buck Moon. See, 3 days later, there was a full moon in July, and the July full moon is called the Buck Moon. And again, the Bucks play in Wisconsin, the same state as the Packers. So Franco Harris is set to have his number 32 retired. The number 32 equals 50 in reduction. This is the same as Pittsburgh, summing to 50. Steelers equals 50 in reverse. And this is the 50th year since the Immaculate Reception in 72. And now we're coming up on the new Super Bowl. Notice how Super Bowl equals 50 with the S exception. The number 57 equals 50 in reduction. Joe Paterno would have turned 96 years old on the date that Franco Harris died. 96 equals 50. I pointed out in my post that the 50th prime number is 229. Well, it just so happened that the Bucs lost last night to fall to 22-9, and Aaron Rodgers threw for 229 yards in their game against the Rams. When Franco Harris completed the Immaculate Reception, he was exactly 282 lunar phases old. And I point this out because when he died, Giannis Antetokounmpo was 28 years and 2 weeks old. Remember, when the Bucs won the NBA championship, they scored 105 points to clinch the title. Bucs equals 105, so does Franco. Franco's also 30, and Wisconsin was the 30th state added to the Union. However, Franco's number was 32 for his career with the Steelers, and Minnesota was the 32nd state admitted to the Union. So this is a huge two-way riddle, as I've been saying. This Super Bowl falls 612 days after the Arch eclipse near Minnesota. Minnesota with the 612 area code, 612 the eclipse verse. The Super Bowl also falls 601 months and 20 days after the Immaculate Reception. And think about how Franco Harris's first Super Bowl victory, where he won the MVP award, was in Super Bowl IX against the Vikings. And now the Packers need to win 9 in a row to win their Super Bowl. If you don't include the end date, Joe Paterno died 32 days after his birthday. Franco Harris, news of his death breaking on a date with 32 numerology. And 32 is the number connected to Christ. Christ equals 32. Also, Christ equals 85, like 32. NFL equals 32. Of course, there's 32 teams in the NFL. Notice how Minnesota was admitted on May 11th. Like 511. Notice how Mary equals 511. The Immaculate Conception. All right, so I think I'm just about to the end of my riddles here for you, but again, sports have multiple things going on for them at once. And I think what I showed you in this video is that whether the Vikings go to the Super Bowl or whether the Packers somehow come back and make it, there's riddles for both, very strong. And again, I know it sounds crazy to tell you that the Packers might go, but think of all the crazy things that have been happening. We had the Vikings' insane comeback against the Bills, and then the Vikings' insane comeback against the Colts, who just fired the guy who beat the Bills in the previous biggest comeback. The World Cup final was unbelievable. The Packers coming back and winning would be completely unbelievable. And I just think it's par for the course. But again, I'm not here to tell any people to do what to do with their money, because it's all rigged, and it's not rigged for our benefit. All right, guys. So that'll do it for this one. Thanks to everybody for watching, whether it's live or archived. Please feel free to share, like, subscribe. This work, as is the website, is all viewer supported through the memberships page on gematrinator.com. That'll do it. Peace, love, God bless, and we'll talk to you next time. See ya.